I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully this is going to work. Is that working?
Yeah, we've got you. All good. Yeah.
Lovely. Fantastic. Okay. Brilliant. So I apologize for the kind of bluntness maybe of the things I'm going to be saying now. I also want to give a genuine trigger warning, because I'm going to be using a lot of the material from, lots of Nazi material, which deals also very specifically with the Holocaust as well. So just to sort of flag that up, and triggering is going to be one of the things I really want to talk about. And again, the bluntness is sort of based on having like genuine skin in the game, I guess, as the expression goes. Not so much because I'm a Jew and a Marxist, but because finally, after decades, and I get to the point where I have sufficient amount of money to buy enough of the Fred Perry material that I'd like to own, and if Fred Perry becomes a symbol of Nazism. So it's a really, deeply wounding experience. I was really glad that one of the earlier speakers talked about post-truth, and truth, questioned whether there was anything particularly wrong with post-truth. I'd like to sort of give an impassioned cry for being post-truth, or perpetually post-truth. The way in which I'm going to be working with the material is in contrast, I guess, to the deep psychoanalytical dives that have been going on. I'm going to be staying very much on the kind of semiotic surface of things, where truth really isn't a property that we're particularly looking for. We're kind of interested in systems of meaning. I particularly used Deleuze's formulation, the logic of sense, looking at denotation, signification, which of course, or connotation, manifestation, which is the dyadic relations, the social relations between people, and then the fourth axis being sense, this kind of inexpressible, continually shifting, as he says here, an incorporeal complex, an irreducible entity at the surface of things, a pure event which inheres or subsists in the proposition. And I think that using these kind of formalist tools and structuralist tools enables us to kind of take apart what's taking place in these jokes, these memes, these statements, these games, these kind of hits on the addiction machine that Richard was laying out so well. And so to use, I'm using incredibly up-to-date examples and starting with the 14th century, which seems to me the ideal place to start to elucidate what's taking place. This is the very end of Gawain and the Green Knight. This isn't the Middle English, but Tolkien's more famous translation. And the point I just wanted to draw attention to the band that, sorry for the spoiler alert, by the way, for Gawain and the Green Knight, but Gawain and the Green Knight culminates in Gawain having to return to the Round Table. He's a knight of the Round Table. He's got this shameful band that he has to wear around his neck because he tried to cheat in this contest with the Green Knight, and it's the rebuke. And he gets to the Round Table, and everyone's just kind of deeply amused, and they go, no, don't worry about it. We'll just turn everything on its head, and we'll all wear the symbol of rebuke, and it's absolutely fine. Now we've got the symbol of rebuke. It now becomes part of the livery of the Round Table. It became the distinction of the Round Table. And that inversion is then put right next to, without much kind of commentary, or any kind of commentary, the crown of thorns that Jesus is adorned with. It obviously starts as a sign of shame, and then gets turned into a sign of holiness, of piety, of deliberate sacrifice. And obviously Jesus' sacrifice on the cross is the exact opposite of what Gawain's done. Gawain has not sacrificed anything from a position of sinfulness, which is the opposite of the Christian sacrifice. So it's interesting these two things go together here. And what I wanted to draw attention to is the word I tro there at 2526. Tro, which is a combination of belief and trust and truth, and how these are arbitrary shifting things. So the power here basically is arbitrating the meaning of a sign, and that's the argument against truth. Okay, so the truth is as has been mentioned earlier, is when power fixes the meaning in a sign. So there's a whole load of signs slopping about. Something's being said, but what? What on earth does it mean when you say, hey, you, I live in Finspang? Why is this children's book about the adventures of a frog and a centipede somehow alarming and being shared by people on the far right? Why are right-wing people talking about their tolerance for milk? You know, we get the sense very clearly that something going on here very fascistic, but we're not really sure that we can kind of dig into exactly what's going on. And what's taking place here is and this is literally the only good joke in fascism, is actually the structure of what they're doing, because it follows the structure that Freud lays out in the joke in its relation to the unconscious, because they're saying it's only a joke. I'm not really saying I'm a Nazi. That's part one. Part two is, what about free speech? And it's only speech. I'm only saying I'm a Nazi, and speaking like a Nazi doesn't make you a Nazi. And then part three, flip that narrative. You're the real fascist. You're speaking like a Nazi, so you are a Nazi. And it's really nicely summed up here by Woody Allen.
There's an old joke. Two elderly women are at a Catskill mountain resort, and one of them says, "Boy, the food at this place is really terrible." The other one says, "Yeah, I know, and such small portions." Well,
so we have there the perfect kind of incongruity, the sophistry, the shift where things that don't make sense together, feeling aggrieved at how awful the food is and feeling aggrieved at how little you have of it, which can't logically sort of sit together. And so that's the one decent joke that we're going to come across from the fascists. I had this little quote here about ideological bifurcation, which I think the bit I want to really draw attention to is, you know, this is like an old, long-standing way of fascism speaking, the contrast between its exoteric articulation, the part of its ideology that's for public consumption, and esoteric truth, which is, you know, the kind of shared currency behind closed doors. You know, so this is a kind of marketing exercise in a way, you know, allowed to sort of say, you know, and David Duke's in the US, I think, is probably the most famous kind of embodiment of this kind of gap between the esoteric and the exoteric. So bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that as a long-standing fascist approach, how the hell do we get this? How the hell do we get what we had a couple of weeks ago, where there was a guy who was on TV, on Sky History Channel, well, on a trail for a program on Sky History Channel, who had literally Nazi symbols tattooed all across his face. Nazi, fascist, white supremacist symbols. He has 88 on his cheek, which is Heil Hitler, and the incredibly unimpenetrable number code of the fascists. He has also 2314 on the side, which is white power, the crown, you know, a whole bunch of other stuff. And this is then, you know, to go on television in a way that is, you know, extremely exoteric and deliberately exoteric. So what the question I want to ask is, like, you know, what kind of semiotic manoeuvres are taking place which enable someone to go with Heil Hitler written on their face to go on TV and then issue, because this guy issues a denial that 88 stands for Heil Hitler and says it's the year of his father's death, 1988, but obviously his father's still alive, and it takes, you know, only a couple of hours for journalists to uncover that fact, which he would obviously have known. I mean, it's possible, and I'm not going to be sort of digging into psychology or the kind of underlying motivations. I'm going to be looking at things. I'm going to talk about sincerity, I'm going to talk about irony, but it's going to stay at the sort of level of the formal and the structural. You know, it's possible this guy is a deeply profoundly pathologically stupid person, and wasn't aware of that he would be easily caught out in this lie. But I don't think that's structurally what's taking place. I think what it is the ability to go into public and tell a lie which is known to be a lie and is expressed as a lie, not as a truth. I think the earlier paper actually laid out very nicely the stuff I was going to say about Freud, and also going to say about Moriel. So I might skip over this in the interest of time, but just to say that you know, I'm very interested in this the element, the tendentious joke, which requires three people, which Freud lays out. Apart from the one who's telling the joke, it needs a second person who's taken the object of the hostile or sexual aggression, and the third in whom the joke's intention of producing pleasure is fulfilled. I'm going to map that onto Persian semiotic triads in a bit. It's going to be much clearer and more interesting than that sounds. But so I just want to take that from the Freud. I think the Moriel was talked about in good detail, but again, I'm going to be looking at how superiority, incongruity, and relief are functioning as well in these jokes. And actually, this quote came up as well in that earlier paper. The Daily Stormer, Andrew Anglin, in his Normie's Guide to the Alt-Right, laying out how you make the joke, you say the truth as a joke, and the obvious ploy being, I do actually want to gas kikes, but that's neither here nor there. Even there in the revealing of the joke being true, there's a joke as well. Jokes within jokes. So, in the words of Groucho Marx,
gentlemen, Ciccolini here may talk like an idiot and look like an idiot, but don't let that fool you. He really is an idiot.
That's the perfect riposte, I think, to this tactic of concealing being a Nazi by trying to look like a Nazi. If he looks like an idiot, sounds like an idiot, he is indeed an idiot. These are just an example of some of the empty signifiers which are sort of circulating around in this kind of this Nazi discourse. And we're probably familiar with, people to varying extents will be familiar with these. The OK sign being perhaps the most interesting example, because it was propagated as a 4chan joke, practical joke to say, can we make people incredibly anxious about the OK sign and convince people it's a sign for white power. And then it starts to disseminate and be used in such a way that then arguably becomes indeed a symbol for white power. But there's the plausible deniability always with the sign, because you can say, well, obviously not. The OK sign means OK, it doesn't mean white power. And here we see the maneuver that exactly is taking place at the round table, where a group of people have sufficient power to define what the sign means and then to deny that definition that they've also put forward. Similarly, this thing about two genders in the victory sign, and the use of Pepe, which I'll talk about a bit later, in Kekistan. And what also happens with the shifting of meaning in the signifier is a phrase like, it's okay to be white, which is a heffalump trap of a sentence. It's okay to be white, which is obviously a fascist statement. But then when he tried to refute it in some way, the response is, are you saying it's not okay to be white? That's racist. So I want to talk about these fungible signifiers of hate. And there's a really interesting video about these Kekistani, free Kekistani protest or demonstration. I think this is in DC, in response to Bannon getting fired, I think. And so these group of people are waving the Kekistani flag, and a Black American man walks past and he starts filming it, and he shouts out, all you need to know is that's a Nazi flag without a swastika on it. And the Nazis standing there say, oh, the only thing on a Nazi flag is a swastika, so what's a Nazi flag without a swastika? And that's demonstrably untrue if you look at the flag they're clearly emulating, because there's much more on the flag than just the swastika. But the answer to the guy's question, obviously, what's a Nazi flag without a swastika, is any flag that's being held by a Nazi, which is demonstrably taking place here. But what I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, is why they've included in the video the instance when they're challenged over the lack of the swastika on the flag. The other joke I want to talk about, joke in the loosest terms, is a joke by a guy called Marcus Meechan, who's also known as Count Dankula, who became a small-time YouTube celebrity because he released a video of him teaching his girlfriend's dog to do a Nazi salute. And he explained that he was doing this supposedly because he wanted to annoy his girlfriend. And he said, well, I wanted to do what's the least cute thing I could think of, which was Nazis. And then in this video, it's essentially the dog looking at him saying gas the Jews 26, 27 times while giggling quite a lot, and the dog lifting a paw, and then it's cut with a couple of bits of the dog sitting in front of the computer. The dog's not watching a Nazi rally, obviously, but the computer's showing a Nazi rally and the dog's in front of it. And it's really interesting, that sort of structure of what supposedly is the joke here, because taking Marcus Meechan Marcus Meechan off the back of this was charged with distributing anti-Semitic material and received a £800 fine from the Scottish court. He lives in Scotland, and he used this as a sort of kind of a threat to, argue this was a big threat to free speech, and it bolstered his career as a comedian. And he actually puts the quote marks around himself as a comedian as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I just want to dig into the joke itself just very, very quickly, because what's going on in this joke as such? Well, let's take it at face value and say that he really does just want to annoy his girlfriend, and that, he's using he talks about it as a kind of comic juxtaposition of the dog and gas the Jews. It's very obvious to anyone that he's finding it immensely funny saying gas the Jews, gas the Jews. And what's taking place in this pathetic juxtaposition is that he is diminishing the significance of the death of millions of people in the Nazi Holocaust to bring it down to the level of teasing his girlfriend about a dog, which I think, utterly reasonably, we can infer from that, or can read into that very clearly, a sort of like a particular attitude to the deaths of many millions of people. And I want to contrast this. His argument is like, I'm just making a joke, and then the juxtaposition is comic, and follows it up with, oh, what, can't you make any kind of joke about the Holocaust or about, dogs who are Nazis? So I want to compare that with this.
This is my assistant, Adolf. You named your dog Adolf? I named him after my grandfather, my Opa. He kind of looks like him. He's got a handsome face, but you can tell he's stern. You know what? I have another drawing I want to show you. You're going to love this. Hey. Hitler. Hey, good boy. Yeah, good boy.
So, very clearly you can make jokes about Nazi dogs. This is from the last season, the latest season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which came out at the very start of this year. And structurally, I think what's really interesting is what's taking place here is that what we very much see in this scene is Larry David, who's a very overtly and very famously Jewish figure, who also, as a kind of running comic motif, is very alive to anything that might look like anti-Semitism, and confronted with this very aggressive dog called Adolf that is growling at him. So a Nazi dog. And what frames the humor is the gradual dawning realization on Larry David's face, this is a Nazi dog that's going to tear him to pieces. And the fear and the importance of what's taking place is the exact inverse of what's taking place with Marcus Meechan's joke. Rather than the deaths in the Holocaust being reduced down to the level of the humor about a dog, the humor about the dog is based on the sincere anxiety about Nazism that a Jewish person carries even 70 years after the fall of the Third Reich. It's important to think about the structure of Marcus Meechan's joke as well, and how it wouldn't have worked for him on his basis if he'd used some other kind of quality of Nazism. If he had the dog doing the Nazi salute to him, repeating a statement about the construction of the autobahns. It's not really about the nature of Nazism, an association with the political regime of the Third Reich, but it is very specifically about reducing the significance of the murder of many Jews. There's another joke here, more famous Nazi joke from the producers. There's lots of interesting going on there, but I maybe haven't got time to go into all of them. But again, what's really interesting is how in the construction, first of all, it takes a hell of a lot of effort on the part of Mel Brooks and all the people who are acting and putting this scene together to make the Nazi joke work. And if you contrast that with Marcus Meechan's video, which you can find fragments of, although the original video has been removed from YouTube, you can see there's no amount of kind of technique, there's no comparable amount of technique or structure or investment in the form at all. But what happens in the producers is when we have this famous scene with the Springtime for Hitler dance, we're cutting away to the audience. And what we have in the audience is we are registering the horror of what is taking place. First of all, the sort of tastelessness of the scene that's taking place on stage, but also because embedded in that is the horror of the Nazi regime. So by staging the horror and including it within the humor, you're then able, both inside the reality of the film, when the audience start laughing because they start to take Springtime for Hitler as a gag, and also for the audience of the producers themselves, the audience of the film or the stage play, we can laugh because we've allowed the horror into the space. We've given it, it's part of the comic structure of the gag. These are Roman Jakobson-Six functions of language, and I just really want to put this in because part of Meechan's account of his of how his joke works, he argues that it's about context, and he's talking about the relationship between the dog and the relationship between what he's saying, but he's also talking about the the context in which he's presenting it sort of metatextually. He's saying, I'm presenting this as a joke. But this is the actual context in which this joke appears. It appears on his YouTube site, where, as you can see, he puts himself as a comedian in inverted commas, but a YouTube site where the vast majority of people who are commenting and watching videos are expressing, without any kind of joking content at all, exactly these sort of fascist Nazi ideas. And this is an excerpt from Meechan's comedy gig that he did in London 2019. And he makes this gag, I would have thought the Jews would have liked free speech because it's free. And then he mentions racism, and the audience goes slightly quiet, and he goes, "Oh, you all got dead nervous then. Some people know who I am." So his fascist, racist views are the context in which he's able to make the joke that he is not a fascist or a racist. That joke would not work. Neither of these jokes would work if I were to make them, because I'm not known for saying Nazi and racist things. I'm going to very quickly talk about Pepe and Keck and the frog, which pops up all over the place. I'm not sure how familiar people are with Pepe and his history. Pepe himself is a sort of a relatively benign figure from a cartoon, but Kekistan is this this mythology, this ancient Egyptian mythology that kind of got attached to Pepe, this frog. And the idea is that Kek is some ancient god of chaos, and is the sort of god of all these sort of 4chaners, and explains the kind of anarchic, the seemingly anarchic, misrule, disrespect, and meme magic of the alt-right. And you have the guys like $1 Million Extreme on the left-hand side, who present themselves these kind of anarchic, it's all just a joke, piling in anything and everything in a sort of nonsensical way. However, and I think as Richard laid out really nicely, this misrule, this chaos is, again, just a sort of a structural smokescreen for what is in fact a really very clearly easy to interpret and very kind of hierarchical, reactionary, and inherently conservative structural beliefs. When someone ironically calls themselves Sargon of Akkad, at the same time, they are indeed just wholly kind of positive about the idea of massive imperial powers. When Sam Hyde is ironically talking about throwing together sort of Black Lives Matter and transracial imagery, it's also just absolutely and sincerely an attack on the idea of racial equality, or on gender equality, or on the idea of gender fluidity. Any kind of progressive idea has no place in the sort of strict hierarchy of Keck. And I think that fits really nicely with what was just said about the kind of ability to reproduce. We see this as a kind of capitalist line of reproduction. You have the same kind of conservative ideas, this reproducibility of the meme, the circulation of the meme. It's always, the frog's face. You know exactly what you're going to get with that. So I want to dig very quickly into the structure of how these work on a semiotic level. And I want to use this Persian sign. Persian sign is a sign that is something that stands to someone for something in some respect or capacity. So this is the tripartite structure. At the top there we have the thing which stands for something. The second part we have the something for which the thing stands. And the third part we have the someone for whom that stands. And these are indivisibly linked. And that's what's taking place in these exchanges, I want to argue. So how's that working in a non-ironic Nazi sign? This is really very simple. Okay, so we have Heil Hitler, or the Nazi salute. That's the thing that we are seeing. That's the thing that's standing in. What's that standing in for? That's standing in for fascist obedience to the strong leader, shared racialized hatred, blah, 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 blah. And who's that standing in for that too? That's to adherents and also observers of Nazism alike. It's the same. Whether you're a Nazi or not a Nazi, you see here Heil Hitler, and you know what that means in this non-ironic structure. And again, I'm saying ironic as a formalist, structuralist quality, not a psychological structure. So the ironized Nazi sign, what do we have? We have the 88 that's written there, and that stands in for this object, which is Heil Hitler. And who's that standing in for? To whom is that standing in for that? Anyone who's inducted into this letter number code. How does that function then? So let's think about that Kekistani flag that we saw. In the Kekistani flag, that is this meaningless flag, but it's standing in for the Reichskriegs flag, which it echoes so much. And there we have the interpretant space, which is the guy who's caught walking past says, that's the Nazi flag without the swastika. So it requires the non-Nazi space to make the Nazi sign into a sign. Without the non-Nazi interpretant, we don't actually have a functioning Nazi sign. So what we have here in the first is we have in the first place of this meta sign of Nazism, then we have a triggered normie and ironic Nazism, and that's standing in for sincere Nazism. And who's that communicating to? That's communicating to actual Nazis. So you have the triggered person, that first sign of which requires the active response of the non-Nazi incorporated into this meta sign, which says, look, here you go. Here's someone wetting their pants about how we're Nazis when we're clearly not Nazis. And what that means is that we really are Nazis, and who are we communicating that to? Other actual Nazis. So what Nazi jokes mean in structural sincerity is that they are making you cry, because that's standing in for making you dead, and that's a message communicated to other Nazis. In other words, it's an entirely open shibboleth, like having the 88 written straight on your face, which is laughing at the joke, laughing at the normie, stands in for endorsing a set of unspoken ideas. And who's that stand in for? It's a way of constructing, through engagement with the sign, a Nazi collective. So it's a way of actually congregating as Nazis in public by sharing these, because by laughing at the joke and the normie, you are then sharing these ideas, and you're allowed to collect because you're collecting concealed under this sign relationship. It's, what's the context that these people take place in? Well, it's, the comedy Unleashed bunker that Mark Meechan tells his jokes in. This is a actual retreat into a semi-literal bunker. I think it's more of a kind of shed somewhere in London. But what's going on with this is, these are things that supposedly cannot be said, yet they're absolutely kind of mainstream views. We have a Tory MP who talks about cultural Marxism. We have it's Ben Garrison, supposedly a politically incorrect cartoon, actually just reiterating, very substandard mainstream opinion. So it's not these things can't be said, it's that they can't be said without being disparaged, at least by some people, unless you then kind of congregate amongst a group of people who are all going to accept the message as totally acceptable. So there's inherently kind of an anti-social element to the argument of saying it's not a thing that can be said. I'm going to skip a little bit further forward.
Yeah, Michael, if you could just wrap up in the next couple of minutes or so, we can get to the Q&As.
Sorry,
but you can touch on some of this.
I'll wrap up in exactly a minute.
Excellent.
Just to say, so if there's a joke that's operating, we are within the joke, not without the joke. When we have an image like this, where Keck Magician is sharing an image of Trump on a tank with a massive flag, there's nothing that's structurally insincere about this. This is just the straight, open expression of sincerely what is wanted. These are some examples of how this translates into actual kind of power. This is a person who committed the murderous atrocity in Christchurch, giving the OK sign. So this is my 3-point guide to beating Nazis. What do you have to do? 1, reclaim the joke and speech. 2, reinscribe meaning and values. 3, take Nazis seriously. 1, this is the reclaiming the joke, the Cyrano de Bergerac approach to Nazis. It's not about being complicit or self-abasement. It's about taking the joke and then playing with the joke and taking it further. because once you've removed the offence that is staged, you don't allow that kind of Nazi communication to formulate. The second point is about rejecting the nihilism that's inherent in it, and I'm drawing on some ideas from Wendy Brown, which I haven't got time to go into. But the idea is that to re-inject these signs with meaning, to assert the meaning that's in them, and show that you care about the meaning in these kind of keks and these pepes and whatever. You're demonstrating that caring, and you're demonstrating through caring that things actually do matter, and that refuses that sign formation. And then finally, calling out the joke. I understand that you are pretending not to be a Nazi. Refuse the joke. What's the sensible, sincere, literal response to someone who wants to murder other people? And I use this video to end with.
They deserve the welfare. No, it's like, oh, yeah. Nothing to talk about.
And the best part of that video is when the guy walks away having punched him in the face and says, there is nothing to talk about. Thank you.